It's time for another Friday update on the Canadian housing market, the Saturday edition. I've been traveling a lot for work, okay? Give me a break. I've got 5 stories for you today, including yet another home fire at a new build home. And this one is fancy. First up, the Canadian Real Estate Association has released the national housing market data for November, and once again, prices and sales have fallen. Sales were down 0.9% month over month and year over year, while the home price index declined 1.1% from last month, but was up 0.6% from last year. Keep in mind that with inflation hovering around 3%, this is still a drop in real value. For those of you following along at home, we're now at a 16% drop since the peak in March of 2022, which is approximately a 21% drop in real value when adjusted for inflation. Next, the government has announced another new strategy to address the housing crisis, and surprise, it's actually a good idea this time. They're reviving an old CMHC program that provided a catalog of pre-approved housing designs from Canadian architects to help expedite the home building process. This strategy was pitched to the federal cabinet back in August by Dr. Mike Moffat, an economist who focuses on housing-related issues, which is probably why the idea actually makes sense. Moffat estimates that these standardized designs could cut up to a year off of home construction times. Most media reports have been calling this a wartime housing strategy and talking about post-war homes in the 1940s and 50s, but the CMHC actually published these catalogs for over 30 years from 1947 to 1978. These catalogs are actually pretty fun to look through because you'll probably recognize some of the designs if you walked around a neighborhood that was built in the 1960s or 70s. The history of this program could easily be a video on its own. Of course, as Dr. Moffat points out, the success of the program will depend on how it's implemented and how the new designs are put together. For maximum benefit, we need to focus on designs that are labor efficient, implementing new technologies and materials for faster building, making the homes more energy efficient than older designs, and going beyond single detached homes to include designs for multiplexes, mid-rise apartment buildings, student residences, garden and laneway suites, etc. The government estimates that the designs will be ready by the end of next year, so it'll be interesting to see how this one pans out. Next, the government is implementing changes to the student visa program. Students planning on studying in Canada will now need to prove that they have $20,635 for living expenses in addition to travel and tuition costs. This is more than double the previous requirement of $10,000, which had been unchanged for about 2 decades. They've also extended the policy allowing international students to work unlimited hours off campus from the end of this year to the end of April. Immigration Minister Mark Miller said they were reviewing how many hours international students should be able to work off campus, with a return to the previous limit of 20 hours a week being on the draconian end of the spectrum. He also noted that allowing 40 working hours per week would give people reason to come to Canada and not focus on their studies. This is some interesting mixed messaging because last year when the cap was lifted, they said it was to address labor shortages. And just a couple of months ago, Miller himself described international students as being an asset that is very lucrative, instead of being, people. In other news, Canada's household debt service ratio has hit 15.22% of disposable income in the third quarter of 2023, the highest on record since data started being collected in 1990. After 20 years of constantly increasing household debt, rising interest rates are making that debt much more expensive, while also putting downward pressure on the value of real assets. As a result, household net worth shrank by 1.8% in the third quarter. On top of that, while debt service costs are going up, a larger proportion of that is going to interest. Since the rate hike started in 2022, interest payments have increased by 86.9%, but principal payments have decreased by 16.8%. So although we're spending much more on debt service payments, we're also paying off less debt every month. Finally, we've got another home fire, this time at a luxury mansion. On Thursday morning, fire crews in North York responded to a blaze that completely gutted a newly built luxury home. A viewer named Marty, who lives nearby, sent in a video of the fire that he took early Thursday morning. Now, I saw this story on TV while I was eating a crappy hotel breakfast, and as soon as they mentioned that the property was listed for sale, I started researching it. Turns out the property was bought in 2020 for $3.45 million and had a 3-bed, 3-bath bungalow on it. The buyer then began redeveloping it into a much larger luxury residence and listed it for sale in October at $13.8 million. Then, on Thursday, it was completely gutted by a 2-alarm fire and is now being demolished. I made this post saying I thought the details were interesting, but it was too early to draw conclusions. However, just a few hours later, a video emerged of 4 people heading towards the house with cans of gasoline. According to a detective with the Toronto Police, the suspects pulled up to the house in a dark Mercedes sedan, brought cans of gasoline to the back of the house, set it on fire, and then fled in an unknown direction. According to CB24, the owner of the home, who is a builder, said that he has no idea why the home was targeted. There's really not enough information yet to conclude exactly why a team of people driving a Mercedes would decide to burn down a $13.8 million home, but personally, I'm very interested to see the follow-up on this story. That's all for this week, so as always, thanks for watching and enjoy your weekend.